So first off, establish in your mind the aspiration to free yourself from suffering, from the causes of suffering, and ultimately to attain a state of Buddhahood and to formulate that intention, that aspiration as a way, formulate that aspiration with concern and a sense of gratitude and responsibility for all other beings who are also likewise suffering and can be led and can achieve a state beyond suffering, a state of Buddhahood, and that you will lead them, accompany them, guide them, ensure that they attain the path, the fruition of the path of awakening. And in order to do so, then now you are here listening to the teachings with the intention to reflect on them and to apply them as much as you're able in order to accomplish that aspiration, in order to fulfill your wishes, both for your own and for others' sake. So from time to time, while we're here together tonight, today, and notice whether or not that listener has that attitude. So we are on the fourth chapter of Shantideva's composition, and we are at verse 43. So up to this point, Shantideva has outlined various contemplations or reflections that will prevent our bodhicitta, our pledge for bodhicitta, both the aspiration and engaging bodhicitta. And these reflections are along the lines of, first of all, understanding the benefits of of fulfilling that pledge, and the disadvantage of losing it, and then also he discusses how difficult it is to attain this opportunity, this human life, and how difficult it is to pull ourselves out of experiences, long-term experiences of suffering. And then reflecting on the what it is that causes us to wander in confusion. What is it that contributes or causes us to not be able to fulfill our potential? Given that in our Mahayana view, it's all sentient beings, no matter how minute physically they may be to us, or how strange they may be. The assent they all have as their core essence, this Buddha nature, pure nature. And that pure nature is realizable. And if that's the case, then here we are with a very sophisticated understanding of that, and a very highly developed sort of cognitive mental process that enables us to do quite amazing things. And how is it that, given all the benefits of attaining enlightenment, what is it that prevents us or retards us or holds us back from accomplishing that? If that Buddha nature is naturally present. And so we come to the whole discussion, or the whole discussion on the afflictions, those afflictions that torment our mind, principally craving, aggression or aversion, and stupidity or ignorance. And then Shantideva introduces us to various various contemplations to identify those afflictions, and how essential it is to find them, to be able to recognize afflictions, and how important it is to not befriend our afflictions, and particularly where we ended is to actually see them as the enemy, our natural enemy. Okay, so then we are, if we look at verse 43, I think, yeah, he said, this shall be my all-consuming passion. Filled with rancor, I will wage my war. Defilement of this kind will halt defilement, and for this reason it shall not be spurned. So here, when he says, So basically, if attachment and desire and aversion and so forth, the other afflictions, are the obstacle, or they are, if we are afflicted with those, how could it be possible to be free of them? That's basically, that's pretty much all we have to work with. Even the very thought that we don't want to suffer is a form of aversion. And how we want to, even if we think just in purely selfish terms, even wanting to be happy, or wanting to increase our happiness, or wanting to prolong our happiness, is a form of affliction, is an affliction. So here he's explaining how we should use our desire, use our aversion as weapons to destroy desire, to destroy aversion. Rancor means anger. And the passion means attachment. So they are afflictions. But for the beginner, for beginners like us, they are the afflictions that we have to use to destroy afflictions. We don't have to worry that we shouldn't desire enlightenment, because it's desire, and desire is what's preventing us from attaining enlightenment, or so we learn. But for the beginner, we use desire and we use aversion. If we, maybe you've heard that there's two principal obscurations. There's our kleshas, our affliction, the obscuration of the afflictions, anger, greed, and so forth. And then there's our cognitive obscurations. It means the obscurations to knowing, cognitive obscurations. And so here we're acknowledging that we need to use desire and attachment, which are kleshas, which are afflictions, and we need to use them in such a way that they won't create more harm. And our kleshas, these afflictions, if we use them against afflictions, then they do not cause harm. Recognizing also that it is very dualistic. It's a dualistic fixation, attachment and aversion. If we use them as beginners, then they will begin to erode the coarse obscurations. And cause no harm to us, to the user, as long as they are applied to our obscurations, or to our afflictions, to the kleshas. As our coarse afflictions, as these coarse klesha afflictions erode, then we begin to antidote, or they begin to antidote this cognitive obscurations. On the other hand, if we direct those obscurations towards objects or beings, then our klesha obscurations are reinforced and become greater. So usually, ordinary people perceive attachment and aversion as very natural, very justified, very appropriate. It's very appropriate to be aggressive or to be very driven and attached in ordinary circumstances. But here, we don't, without denying that, we use them and direct them towards defilements, or what he calls defilements here, the kleshas themselves, to become accustomed to the remedies. That is to say, when he says here, I will wage my war, he says, I will use my passion and rancor, my attachment and aversion, in antidoting these afflictions by engaging in the the 10 categories of virtue, and training, and mind training, and bodhicitta mind training, training and loving compassion. I mean, compassion is kind of ordinary, conventional compassion arises by having an aversion towards the suffering of others. And love is a reaction to wanting others to be happy. So there's desire and aversion there that at the outset of the path, we need that. And then practicing the conduct of the bodhisattva, engaging in these antidotes, or engaging in the paramitas. So this is what he calls wage my war, with these practices of the bodhisattva. Again, this chapter, he's not really giving he's not giving all the conduct so much as that this chapter is carefulness, and we're reflecting along these lines in order to develop carefulness and to separate ourselves from carelessness. And it's all as we practice the bodhisattva conduct. In other words, these chapters here are how to practice, not, what we're filling in here is what we're practicing as we practice. And again, the intention is to develop a mentality that's careful. Then defilement of this kind will halt defilement, as we said. And for this reason, it shall not be spurned. So for the time being, I will indulge in the afflictions, and they will, in the natural course of the path, be antidoted and completely uprooted later. we hold on to the antidote, hold on to the remedies, hold on to the practice of, say, virtue, make a distinction and cling to have an aversion for non-virtue and an attachment to virtue. That's the responsibility, the duty of a beginner on the path. We must, like it says in the commentary, we have to develop a grudge, a sustained grudge against the kleshas, against the afflictions. We should resent the kleshas. And we do that, as been taught previously, by reflecting on how persistent they are, how negative they are, how useless they are, and so forth. So this attitude of using the kleshas is a form of mindfulness. And it promotes mindfulness, and it also promotes kind of the introspective, the mind that pays attention to itself, to see how it's doing. And mindfulness is to know, to remember what is to be done. And then, of course, carefulness is, in this chapter, it's specifically developed here in the chapter on being careful, which is to know the difference between what's beneficial and what's harmful. So then, the next verse here, 44, says, better if I, this is all in regards to having pledged or having made a commitment or having the responsibility to not succumb to the kleshas, not to succumb to the afflictions. Better if I perish in the fire, better that my head be severed from my body than ever I should serve or reverence my mortal enemies' defiled emotions, meaning the kleshas. So then we should, this is Shantideva, and so we should hold that standard of practice up and emulate that by again and again reflecting and renewing our commitment and resolving, making a resolution to ourselves that we will be strong in resisting or antidoting or seeing the negativity of the kleshas in all circumstances, in all situations. Okay, then 45. Common foes, when driven, now here meaning, he's using the comparison here. Common foes, when driven from the state, retreat and base themselves in other lands and muster all their strength, the better to return. But enemy afflictions are without such stratagems. So, unlike ordinary enemies, okay, we're talking here, he's very militaristic in his language here. So unlike, I think even after he left Nalanda, then he went and he was known to have taken a job as a bodyguard to some South Indian ruler, king or something. think those are bodyguards. He must have been interesting. What was it? So here, usually, I don't know so much about these things, but usually then if two people, armies fighting, then one gets chased away or ruined, then they go and they regroup and find allies, and they use the information they got when they lost to better strategize to come back and defeat again. But he's saying here that like the kleshas are nothing like that. Once the kleshas are uprooted, then they have nowhere to go. And we'll get into that part in a minute. But it's true that ordinary virtue, practicing ordinary virtues can reduce the afflictions. Generosity, with the pain of a miserly person experiences when they give, will reduce that attachment. Ordinary practices of virtue have the karma is that reduces our aggression, our attachment, and so forth. But they won't uproot, virtue won't uproot the kleshas. What utterly drives out, as he says here, or what utterly uproots or destroys the kleshas, or is the realization of the selflessness. Particularly as we approach on the Bodhisattva path, this Bodhisattva levels. At a certain point, through carrying out these reflections and contemplations and the subsequent here things we'll get into about selflessness, then someone who you develop into a person that's mind is on a certain level of refinement, where the ordinary gross afflictions have been eliminated. And from there on, new afflictions don't arise. There's only sort of the exhaustion of the accumulated habitual tendencies of previous karma. This is the first level on the Bodhisattva levels. And the mainly what's occurring from there on are the purification or the antidoting of cognitive obscurations. So the afflictions don't, once the afflictions are uprooted, then they no longer are a threat. And then in the next verse 46, he says, miserable defilements, in other words, the kleshas, and he's miserable defilements, it's sort of the worst of the worst. Miserable defilements scattered by the eye of wisdom. In other words, the wisdom that sees the lack of self-identity of the afflictions. Where will you now run when driven from my mind? Whence would you return to do me harm? But oh, my mind is feeble, I am indolent. Okay, we'll go in, let's take a moment here and go into this, what's being referred to here. Scattered by the eye of wisdom, the practice here is to, first of all, based on the above, having a certain distance, a certain wedge was put between you as a mind owner and an affliction, say anger or clinging, desire, say, or anger. The key point, the practice of the key point here is that we need to, through the previous reflections, and keep holding this kind of, I like this idea of having a grudge against the afflictions. It separates us from the affliction. It drives a wedge between, I want to say you, me, between the one who does it, to us, the mind owners. It drives a wedge between it. Then what do? Then we can look at the affliction and examine the affliction on completely conventional, the conventional level, and see whether or not that anger exists, actually, truly exists. Does it have its own presence? Is it real? Just as it is, not philosophically, but through your ability to know the investigation is to determine whether or not anger is real. Okay? When you examine anger, like he says here, where will you now run when driven from my mind? So you examine. If you had anger and you notice it's there, and then it begins to disappear, becomes to dissipate, mainly because you have, well, I skipped that part, but at this point, you've withdrawn your anger from an object. And now recognize that anger is an event that's occurring in your mind. And as it dissipates, you see where is it going. And when it's just lurking, or not lurking, when it's present, try to identify where it actually is in your mind. Or where did it come from? Where did it arise from? How did it get born? And again, this is when you are looking at it as your own mind, an event of your mind. And determine and draw the conclusion of not being able to find a place where it came from, not being able to find anywhere that it is abiding when it's, even though it's present, and when it disappears, that it didn't really, had nowhere where it went. You determine that it is free, or it lacked its own self-identity, its own sense of being. It didn't exist independently. It arose through interdependent causes and conditions coming together in your own mind. If you encounter a circumstance that gives rise to anger, and again, this isn't necessarily, it takes a little bit of experience or a familiarity, let's say, to be able to do it on the spot. But you can, when you have the presence of, say, anger in your mind, you must, and it was caused by, or it came in the wake of some encounter, some circumstance, we must examine whether or not this anger came from external source, from an external source. This we have to do, at least, or at the outset. So then again, examine the object that you assume, or the object that gave rise in your mind to anger, and see, investigate as to whether that circumstance or that person or that situation has the anger that came to you from them. And how did that happen? If you think it came from them, how could that happen? To try to identify how it's possible for someone. We have that expression, oh, this person makes me mad, or this person got me angry. That's an expression, but it's fine to use expressions, but that expression doesn't have any basis in truth or reality. Certain circumstances come together and we experience anger, but we shouldn't jump to, we can't just jump to the conclusion that somebody put that anger in us. And so we should take the time to determine that that anger did not come from outer external circumstances, situations or people or animals. That's part of the process of really identifying the selflessness of, say, anger, for instance, by first dismissing the object as the source. Okay, so that First, that we should just get used to as practitioners. Anyway, I shouldn't skip over it, but that should be something that we are familiar enough with so that we have the mental flexibility to own our own afflictions. Never think that our afflictions came from the external world. There's no, and you investigate until you conclude that yourself. There's not a doctrine. It's just the truth. So prove that truth by your own ability to investigate. How is that possible? Then, here he says here, the next one, defilements are not in the object, number 47. Nor within the faculties. In other words, you see or you heard something and you got angry. So is it in the person that said something? Or in your ear? Your sense, like it's your sense organ. Did your sense organ, did it come from there? I mean, check it out, investigate it, it's possible. You have to come to the conclusion that it couldn't have come in from external, your anger. If somebody actually caused, had the capacity to cause us anger, then they would have to be able, then they would always, everybody would always be angry, which isn't the case. Some people may love what somebody else says, and you just get enraged. So that idea. So, and then it says, nor within the faculties, meaning if it's not in the object, then maybe it's in the perceiving capacity of our organs. Like our our eyes have the faculty to see, and our ears as a physical organ have the faculty to hear, and our tongue, and so on and so forth. Well, not so on and so forth. There's only 5 senses. And each sense organ has a faculty, and then when that faculty becomes activated, then it gives rise to a corresponding consciousness. So that an object is seen by the organ of the eye, and the faculty of sight gives rise to eye consciousness. And there is a open, non-judgmental, visionary experience that gives rise to, you could say causes, mental consciousness to arise that cross-references and makes judgments and so forth. It gets complicated after that. Is it in there? Is it in that system that anger came from? Investigate. Or somewhere in between, which is a little absurd because there's just space. There's nothing. Like it can't come between you and if it's not in the organ, if it didn't come from the faculty of the sight, say, every time you see this person, you get angry. Okay, they didn't, if you eliminate that, well, they didn't have some projecting kind of metaphysical anger projector that somehow shot it out, and you're an innocent, open tabula rasa, and he or she put anger in you. It's like, like a affliction. Then there's the I organ, because you have to blame. We're still in the blame game. Okay, they couldn't have done it, Then it might be my I did it by seeing them, and my faculty that became the basis for my I consciousness. Did my I consciousness, that doesn't have a kind of that's an open avenue, so to speak. I consciousness, just an open avenue between objects and the mental consciousness. So how did it come from them? No. You decide that. Again, it's not a belief system. You have to examine, use your ability to know. And it couldn't have come from some between space, like the space between an object and my I. It couldn't have come from there because it's just empty space. Then you go, oh, it came from my mind. Okay, well, if it came from our mind, where did it come from? What part of my mind did it come from? Because it's certainly a feeling, an affliction that has a feeling to it, that has texture, that is actually affecting my body physically. So it must be real, or at least it must be as real as my body is. So where did it come from? If it didn't come from any of these other places. And as it begins to, through this process of examination, its lifespan will come to an end. And then you can say, well, where did it go? If it was real, if it existed, if it had its own identity, which is my habit to assume that whatever appears exists as some real independent feeling thing, then where did it go? And basically, you're coming to see, you're steering yourself in the direction of seeing the truth of appearances having that appearances lack their own self-identity. That something can actually appear but not have its own, not be real. Okay? Something like that. Not something like that. That. Wait a minute, what happened? Defilements are not in the object, nor within the faculties, nor somewhere in between. And if not elsewhere, where is their abode, whence they inflict their havoc on the world? They don't exist anywhere. And you're experiencing that. You've become familiar with that experience of examining what appears to exist and coming to the conclusion that it doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist as something real. So if they come back, then notice where they came from. Basically, examine your afflictions to determine, to conclude that they are baseless. There's no base. There's no root. They're rootless and baseless. That's how you uproot the afflictions. First, see them as a problem, so that you are, again, so that there's some perspective. And through the previous, we're proving that they're a problem. It shouldn't be a problem to see the afflictions as being a problem, if not the problem. And understand also that the cause of these arisings is ignorance, our stupidity, our lack of wisdom. And the result of that is suffering. All sentient beings suffer this way, from this kind of ignorance of the nature of appearances, the nature of phenomena. And when they come up in the mind and we feel their presence and we feel the result of them as being discomfort and suffering, then notice how they are controlling us, how we are enslaved by them, by these afflictions, emotions, you could say. And then look to see where they abide in your mind. And also reflect from time to time when you're experiencing them, saying, wow, this has been going on a long time. I have been under the control of my afflictions for a long time, and they will continue in the future unless I do something about them. I must now apply the Dharma to that affliction by examining it, by discovering its truth. Then, but oh, my mind is feeble, I am indolent. That's what, so then we come back to that, our old habits again, our old, we know, and we should change our conversation that we have about our inner life, let's call it, kleshas or what have you. We need to assure ourselves that the kleshas can totally be overcome, can totally be destroyed, can totally be uprooted not just suppressed. Suppressing, ignoring, and suppressing actually does do this thing of they base themselves in other lands and muster all their strength and better to return. That does happen if we ignore and bury our afflictions. They get buried in this alaya consciousness. That's why we flip out when something similar to that is buried confronts us. That it throws its weight behind the slightest little hurt. There's a lot in our Lojong, the 7-point mind training, about these kinds of things. Don't wait in ambush. Don't go for the jugular. All these kinds of things. It's because we have built up this habit of burying our kleshas, burying our hurt. So we should know and remind ourselves again and again that these afflictions can be totally uprooted, not just blocked, or maybe I can become more generous, maybe I can become more, not that. It can be completely uprooted. But oh, my mind is feeble. My understanding may be weak now. I'm a very, in the face of my afflictions, I'm very like a victim, very meek. My mind is meek, it says. Insecure. I have no confidence. We keep saying that. So now we need to assure ourselves that just based on simple, conventional experience, conventional truth, that if the afflictions are impermanent, then they can be completely uprooted. And we should then overcome, a lack of diligence, a lack of enthusiasm. So all those thoughts, all those phrases there are valuable to reflect on again and again, and kind of revise and upgrade our conversation and not denigrate our abilities as if they were real and solid and had their own self-identity and were permanently embedded in a mind that truly exists. As we through this examination, meditation, through this getting familiar with how to examine the sort of the exhaust of our mind. It's like you can see like a polluting factory in the distance by its big black cloud of smoke that's shooting up from it. That's like our afflictions. It's a footprint of our clinging to mind as being real. And so as we undermine again and again the belief in the reality, in the realness, the self-identity of our afflictions, as our afflictions become more or less powerful, less influential, have less control over us, there is also a corresponding increase in our wisdom. It's a simultaneous situation. You know, as your kleshas become less, then your wisdom becomes more. It's not that, that's why we say that there's no goal. It's the language of the path. We use that language because we need to have some sort of structure as beginners so that we have a path. But in practice, our goal is the truth, to see the truth. We can call that enlightenment. On the path, we do. Like at the beginning, I must attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. But in actual practice, the result comes about through the natural through making obvious our wisdom nature. Nothing new is accomplished. Enlightenment is not something new that you didn't experience before. Like, oh, now this person attained Buddhahood, or now I just attained Buddhahood. Or even enlightenment. Like Rinpoche always said, if you have kleshas, you're not enlightened. If you don't have kleshas, then you're enlightened. So depending on your point of view, like from the path point of view, it's one of antidoting the kleshas. From the fruition point of view, it's the emergence of natural wisdom. So nothing is attained. And when we're doing this examination, we're not really wishing for anything. We're not trying to achieve anything particularly. We're using our ability to know to just have the simple aspiration to find out what's true. We could say that every time we reduce clinging, that's our own version of enlightenment at that particular point, at that particular time. If you, like I say, if you feel pain when you practice generosity and you continue, and second time your pain is less, and then then those are your point, those are your enlightenment. Because enlightenment is lack of clinging. There's no clinging. The second noble truth has been interrupted or eroded or cut. Okay, so basically here Shantideva is inviting us, and the commentary is explaining how to examine the afflictions in their own place and see how they have no intrinsic being. They have no place where they abide. They have no place where they came from. They have no place where they go, no destination. They are unborn, unceasing, unabiding. They are unreal, just like a movie on a screen. And ignorance is like when we were little children and used to scream and cry and run out of the theater because of some swamp monster or something. We didn't have the sophistication or the capacity to see that there's a machine back there with plastic, or what do you call it, vinyl, or this cellulose stuff with little pictures on it of fake people. And there's a light that's shooting through that onto that screen, and it's going quickly. We couldn't analyze it. We were too hysterical. So now we need to sober up and to be able and use our ability to uncover the truth about illusory phenomena and identify them as being such. And that is becoming familiar with the truth. Defilements are not in the object, nor within the faculties, nor somewhere in between, and if not elsewhere, where is their abode? Whence they inflict their havoc on the world? They are simple mirages, and so take heart. The mirages means they appear, something appears, but they have no inherent reality. Like a movie, They're illusions. And here, he talks here in the commentary, says that illusions have three properties. One is when conditions come together, they arise, they appear. So you have a screen, you have a light bulb, you have a machine with gears that drive, you have the film, and so all those conditions come together with your eyes and your mind and so forth present, you perceive, and so the images arise, the illusion begins. And the second quality that illusions have is that they are perceived by the mind. And the third characteristic, you could say, is that they are without intrinsic being. They don't truly exist. Just like when you look at your face in the mirror, you don't get all confused. Like, oh my God, is there two of me? Like, and you don't look like that. How do I, you don't get all worked up about it. It's there for your, it's just the truth, it's just interdependently arisen illusion. And it's very accurate, but it has no, it's not really there. It's only there, but it's not really there. And it will have an effect on you if you let it. And we let things have an effect on us, like a reflection in a mirror, when we make lots of judgments about it and kind of own the whole situation. I'm real, that's real, I'm old, that's old, you know. So then, you know, but if we see it as an illusion, then we see the truth of it. So this, anyway, just to, they're simple, it says, they are simple mirages, and so take heart. That's good. That's the truth. And the more we become familiar with that, the more we become familiar with that, and by that I mean the more opportunities we take to sit down and quietly and quiet our mind. If you like, you could take refuge, develop a moment of arising some motivation, a pure motivation, good bodhicitta motivation, and then just become still, and then provoke an affliction to arise, like remember something or think of something that produces desire, something that produces anger, something that produces jealousy, what have you. And then notice how when it starts to rise, and separate yourself from the object that you brought to mind that provoked it, and just turn your attention to it as it begins to arise, and let it arise so that you can begin to see how it is, where it came from, where it abides, and so forth. And if we can do that and use our wisdom, this prajna practice is using our ability to know and become familiar with that. And then that will, the truth of realizing through your own observation, your own intelligence, say, the truth of that will, because it's true, you're not turning something into something that it's not. You're antidoting what we've turned what's not into something. So here we're antidoting our habitual tendency to take things as being real and solid and essentially existing in their own right, and seeing the truth of their illusory nature, their appearance. We could, on the most higher language, we could say the inseparability of appearance and emptiness. But don't get too dictatorial. Don't jump the gun. You just want to see whether or not your afflictions exist or illusions. And draw the conclusions that they lack their own intrinsic being, their own intrinsic presence doesn't exist. They merely appear through the interdependence of causes and conditions. He mentions this, it occurs in other teachings, the difference between a dog's life and a lion's a lion-like life, or practitioner. It's kind of a don't be like a dog. Like when you throw a rock towards a dog chases the rock. You throw another rock and he chases the rock. So don't be like that. A lion, you throw a rock at a lion and he attacks you. That's the way we want to become, a lion-like yogin, not a dog. In the commentary, he was saying how there's people who have an aversion for sense objects, and that's justified. They're impermanent, they're deceptive, and they decay. These three kind of features, like for monks and renunciates who contemplate in this way and react in such a way that they separate themselves from the objects of senses. Objects of senses, yeah. Live by themselves. They don't have relationships, don't talk. They just live all by themselves. Simple, quiet life, free of the encumbrances of ambition and things that will distract them from just a kind of a stillness and simplicity. And every time they give rise to a desire or aversion or something, they apply these contemplations of impermanence and deceptiveness and a decay, and then antidote it that way. Saying, don't be that kind of a practitioner. As soon as an affliction arises, turn your mind directly in on itself and see its nature. Take the path of the lion-like practitioner. Look into the nature of kleshas, into mind itself, and see its non-self nature. That's the lion life. So that, I think, they are simple mirages, and so take heart. And take heart means we need to, like I was saying in the previous, we should really have a really nice conversation that we get used to, sort of our subconscious self-commentary should be nice and uplifted and really open the door to our own possibilities rather than immediately denying your capacity to simply look at something that's been with you like your shadow, you know, since beginning with samsara, you know. We have if we don't do something to reduce our kleshas intentionally in this life, then the future, I mean, I don't want to go on about that, but just think about the future. They are simple mirages, and so take heart. Banish all your fear and strive to know their nature. Strive to know their nature. Search your defilement. Find out, where did it come from? Where does it dwell? Where does it go? Like that. Why suffer needlessly the pains of hell? When we discover that the kleshas have no intrinsic nature, and we gain some familiarity with that through, you know, through reflecting again and again, then those kleshas become easy to uproot. The worst anger, the worst aggression, the worst burning jealousy, the worst lust, the worst craving become easily to uproot. if we become more and more familiar with the nature of the afflictions. So the last verse says, "This is how I should reflect and labor, that I might apply the precepts thus set forth." Precepts here meaning, discipline, like Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, the three higher trainings. This is all how to practice Lojong, how to practice the paramitas, how to practice carefulness, don't forget. So that when we practice discipline, the Shila of discipline, avoiding negative actions, practicing virtuous actions, engaging in benefiting beings, training in compassion and love, and so forth. And the Samadhi, this investigating and then drawing a conclusion and then learning how to just accept the conclusion. When you examine and come to a decision about the lack of inherent reality of mind or of the phenomena of mind, then just accept that and to abide in that understanding. It's called patience. Be patient with your understanding of selflessness. Don't just move on right away. This is how I should reflect and labor, that I might apply the precepts thus set forth. So put Buddha's words into practice and have trust that you can accomplish them. The only reason Buddha taught was because he knew that if people put those words of advice into practice, they could accomplish it. So be that kind of a person who practices the Buddha Dharma in your own humble way, with the inner trust that it's accomplishable. What invalid in need of medicine ignored their doctor's words and gained their health? Okay, that. So even sometimes a doctor can give you medicine and you just take the medicine, but he also has given you some other advice, like stop smoking, stop drinking too much, get up off your butt and do some exercise. He's giving you that advice. So don't just take the medicine and not follow the advice. It might not work. So at times perceive the kleshas as an enemy. Get used to that. At other times, examine them. If you examine but don't then, you lose your spirit of seeing them as enemies, it's very easy to slip into, to succumb or slip under their power again. And then we begin to see our enemies as outer beings and outer circumstances. So there's different advice, so you use different advice and gain traction in all these different aspects of reflecting, contemplating, examining, investigating, and then accepting, drawing conclusions and accepting, and again and again. And then, of course, dedicating the merit if you're engaging in this during a formal session, or dedicate your merit at the end of the day, or dedicate the merit every 10 or 15 minutes of your waking life. Okay, so I think that brings us to the conclusion of this chapter of carefulness or heedfulness. There's one quote that we used earlier. I think it says, "Carefulness brings life, carelessness is death. To increase virtue, practice carefulness with devotion." Yeah. Okay, so we'll end it at this point. This is the 4th chapter. We finished. Wow. Closing prayers, dedication, and aspirations. All the virtue of this practice and all that is gathered throughout the 3 times, I dedicate to all beings without exception, so that they may attain Buddhahood. Following and emulating the omniscient and courageous Manjushri, and likewise Samantabhadra, I completely dedicate all virtue. Since dedicating merit is praised as supreme by victorious ones of the 3 times, I completely dedicate these roots of virtue for the sake of practicing excellent conduct. May the teachings of Lord Buddha, the only source of benefit and happiness, long remain in this world. May the lives of those who uphold the Buddha's teachings be as stable as a victory banner. Supreme Bodhicitta is so very precious. Where it has not yet arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it not decline, but evermore grow and flourish.